In the annals of organized crime, few names resonate with the chilling authority and profound mystery of Carlo Gambino. Born in a small Sicilian village, he ascended to become the quiet architect of arguably the most powerful and enduring crime family in American history. On October 15, 1976, the man who had meticulously built an empire on a foundation of discretion and unyielding loyalty passed away peacefully in his sleep, a stark contrast to the violent ends of many of his contemporaries. Yet this peaceful departure belied a life lived in the shadows, a masterclass in covert power that baffled law enforcement and fascinated the public. How did a man, often described as unassuming and almost invisible, outmaneuver rivals, evade prosecution, and consolidate an influence that stretched from the docks of New York to the highest echelons of political power? The true extent of his genius lay not in brute force, but in a subtle, almost imperceptible manipulation of fear and respect. But few could have imagined how far his quiet ambition would take him. Born Carlo Gambino on August 24, 1902, in Caccamo, a small rural town in the province of Palermo, Sicily, his story began not in the bustling metropolises of America, but in a landscape steeped in ancient traditions and simmering resentments. Unlike some of his future peers who emerged from abject poverty, the Gambino family, while not wealthy, was relatively well established within their community. His father, Francesco Gambino, was a sulfur miner, a profession that, while arduous, provided a steady, albeit modest, income. His mother, Leonarda Maida, maintained the household and instilled in young Carlo a deep sense of family loyalty and respect for tradition, values that would later define his criminal enterprise. At a time when Italy was bleeding migrants across the Atlantic, propelled by economic hardship and the promise of a new world, the Gambino family, like many others, faced the difficult choice of staying or seeking opportunity elsewhere. Sicily, in the early 20th century, was a land of stark contrasts, breathtaking beauty alongside deep-seated poverty, a rich cultural heritage juxtaposed with the pervasive influence of the mafia, or Cosa Nostra. This environment, where informal justice often superseded state law and where omerta, the code of silence, was a way of life, undoubtedly shaped young Carlo's understanding of power, loyalty, and discretion from a very young age. This early exposure to a parallel system of governance where silent strength held more sway than overt displays of power may well explain his lifelong preference for operating beneath the radar. Carlo Gambino's formal education was minimal, a common reality for many children in rural Sicily at the turn of the century. Instead of school books, his formative years were spent observing the intricate social dynamics of Caccamo and, inevitably, the nascent stirrings of organized crime. His early jobs were likely informal and varied, typical of a young man coming of age in a pre-industrial society. There is little record of him working in traditional trades. Instead, his education came from the streets and the subtle apprenticeship within the local mafia structures. By his late teens, Gambino had already caught the eye of local mafia leaders. His intelligence, quiet demeanor, and an innate ability to assess situations without drawing undue attention marked him as a promising recruit. It was in these years that he began to learn the unwritten rules of Cosa Nostra, the importance of hierarchy, the absolute necessity of loyalty, and above all, the power of silence. An incident, though unconfirmed by direct evidence, is often recounted. As a teenager, Gambino reportedly witnessed a minor dispute resolved not by law enforcement, but by the quiet intercession of a local man of respect. This simple act, demonstrating the efficacy of informal power, is said to have deeply impressed him, cementing his belief in the system. It was an unlikely start for a man who would become the quiet king of New York's underworld, a subtle operator in a world of bombast and violence. By the age of 19, in 1921, he had become an initiated member of the mafia, a made man, a crucial turning point that set him on an irreversible path to America and, ultimately, to unparalleled power. Carlo Gambino's ascent to power was a masterclass in strategic patience, political maneuvering, and an almost invisible hand. His journey began in earnest with his arrival in the United States in 1921, entering the country illegally and settling in Brooklyn, New York. He quickly aligned himself with the D'Aquila crime family, then led by Salvatore D'Aquila, one of the most powerful mafia bosses in the city. Gambino's early years in America were marked by his involvement in a variety of criminal enterprises, primarily extortion, loan sharking, and illegal gambling. However, it was during the tumultuous Castellamarese War, 1930 to 1931, that Gambino truly began to distinguish himself. The Castellamarese War was a brutal and bloody conflict for supremacy between two dominant factions of the Italian-American mafia, one led by Giuseppe "Joe the Boss" Masseria, and the other by Salvatore Maranzano from Castellammare del Golfo, Sicily. Gambino, despite his relatively junior status, shrewdly sided with Maranzano, recognizing his strategic acumen. This was a critical turning point. When Maranzano emerged victorious, establishing himself as the boss of all bosses, Gambino's stock rose considerably. However, Maranzano's reign was short-lived, as he was soon assassinated by a coalition of younger, more forward-thinking gangsters, including Charles "Lucky" Luciano, who sought to establish a more stable, commission-based leadership structure. Gambino, ever the pragmatist, quickly adapted to this new order. He joined the family led by Vincent Mangano, one of the original 5 families established by Luciano. Within the Mangano family, Gambino cultivated a reputation for being reliable, intelligent, and, most importantly, discreet. He was loyal, but not blindly so, always observing, learning, and planning. His quiet efficiency allowed him to rise through the ranks, first as a capo, overseeing his own crew, and then as an underboss. A significant turning point came in 1951, with the disappearance of Vincent Mangano and the murder of his brother, Philip Mangano. While the official perpetrator was Albert Anastasia, the family's brutal underboss, many historians believe Gambino played a role in orchestrating the events, or at the very least, benefited from them. With Anastasia now at the helm, Gambino continued to consolidate his power. He became Anastasia's underboss, a position that placed him squarely in line for succession. However, Anastasia's unpredictable and violent nature made him a liability to the other crime families on the commission. In 1957, Anastasia was brutally murdered in a barber shop, an event that shocked the underworld. While the precise details of the hit remain shrouded in mystery, it is widely believed that Gambino, in alliance with Vito Genovese, orchestrated Anastasia's downfall. With Anastasia gone, Carlo Gambino quietly, almost imperceptibly, took control of what would henceforth be known as the Gambino crime family. His major achievement was not just seizing power, but fundamentally reshaping how a crime family operated. He prioritized discretion above all else. Unlike his flashier predecessors and contemporaries, Gambino abhorred unnecessary violence and public displays of wealth. He understood that attention bred scrutiny, and scrutiny led to arrests. He diversified the family's rackets, moving beyond traditional operations into legitimate businesses, using them as fronts for illicit activities while also generating legitimate income. He fostered strong relationships with other crime families through strategic marriages and alliances, most notably with the Lucchese and Genovese families, minimizing interfamily conflicts that had plagued the mafia for decades. The result was an era of unprecedented stability and prosperity for the Gambino family. He centralized power but delegated responsibility, creating a highly efficient, almost corporate structure. The chaos of earlier gang wars became a distant memory under Gambino's calm, calculated leadership. Despite his reputation for discretion, Carlo Gambino's reign was not without its controversies, internal conflicts, and, of course, extensive criminal activities. His path to power, as discussed, involved the suspicious disappearances and murders of his predecessors. While he rarely, if ever, directly participated in the violence, his strategic maneuvering placed him at the heart of many deadly machinations. One of the most significant internal conflicts during his leadership involved Joseph Joe Bananas Bonanno, the boss of the Bonanno crime family. In the mid-1960s, Bonanno attempted to seize control of the Mafia Commission and assassinate several rival bosses, including Gambino and Thomas Lucchese. This audacious plot, known as the Banana War, led to a brutal internal struggle within the Bonanno family and threatened to destabilize the entire New York underworld. Gambino, displaying his strategic brilliance, did not directly engage in open warfare. Instead, he skillfully leveraged his influence on the commission, isolating Bonanno and effectively dismantling his power base from within. He provided support to Bonanno's internal rivals, particularly his consigliere, Gaspar Di Gregorio, thereby weakening Bonanno's position without getting his own hands visibly dirty. Some claim he masterminded the entire plot against Bonanno by subtly encouraging Di Gregorio's ambition. Others argue he was merely a shrewd opportunist, reacting to Bonanno's hubris. Regardless, Bonanno was eventually forced to retire, and Gambino solidified his position as the most powerful figure on the commission. Another defining aspect of Gambino's era was the pervasive nature of his family's criminal enterprises. While avoiding the headlines, the Gambino family operated an extensive network of rackets. They dominated the New York waterfront, controlling unions and extorting shipping companies. They ran massive gambling operations, including illegal casinos and sports betting rings. Loan sharking, where exorbitant interest rates were charged to desperate borrowers, was a significant source of income. They were heavily involved in truck hijacking and stolen goods, moving vast quantities of merchandise through their illicit networks. Perhaps most controversially, the Gambino family, under Carlo's leadership, became deeply entrenched in drug trafficking, particularly heroin. Despite popular belief that Gambino strictly forbade drug dealing due to its high-profile nature and severe penalties, evidence suggests the family was heavily involved, albeit through layers of insulation. This contradiction highlights the strategic pragmatism of Gambino. If the profits were substantial enough, and the risk of direct exposure minimized, the moral implications were secondary. His ability to avoid prosecution for so long was a testament to his strict adherence to discretion and his effective use of corrupt officials and informants. He was known for communicating in veiled language, never directly issuing orders that could be used against him. His lieutenants understood his intentions through subtle cues and indirect commands. Despite numerous investigations and indictments targeting other crime figures, Gambino remained largely untouched by the law for decades. This extended immunity led to a common myth that he had an almost supernatural ability to evade capture. Yet, in truth, it was a meticulous approach to operational security, a deep understanding of legal loopholes, and a willingness to compromise law enforcement figures that truly protected him. Despite his long and largely unmolested reign, Carlo Gambino's later years were not without their personal struggles and eventual decline in physical health. The constant pressure of leading the most powerful crime family in America, while avoiding the relentless pursuit of law enforcement, took its toll. By the early 1970s, Gambino was suffering from a severe heart condition, a chronic ailment that gradually eroded his once formidable energy and focus. He spent increasing amounts of time at his mansion in Massapequa, Long Island, retreating from the daily grind of the underworld. His physical decline led to a shift in the family's dynamics. While he still maintained ultimate authority, much of the day-to-day operations were delegated to his trusted underboss, Paul Castellano, his brother-in-law. This delegation, however, sowed the seeds of future conflict. Many within the family viewed Castellano, a more business-oriented and somewhat aloof figure, as a departure from the traditional values of the mafia. They preferred Aniello Neil Della Croce, a more charismatic and old-school gangster who commanded immense respect among the rank and file. Gambino, however, favored Castellano, seeing him as better suited to navigate the increasingly complex legal and financial landscape of organized crime. This decision would prove to be one of his most controversial, igniting a bitter power struggle after his death. In 1972, Gambino faced one of his most significant legal challenges when the U.S. government sought to deport him back to Italy, citing his illegal entry in 1921. Despite his failing health, Gambino fought the deportation order vigorously, utilizing his extensive legal and political connections. The protracted legal battle dragged on for years, with his lawyers continually citing his deteriorating health as grounds for staying in the United States. It was a strategic maneuver that highlighted his cunning even in illness. Carlo Gambino passed away peacefully at his home on October 15, 1976, from natural causes, a stark anomaly in the violent world he inhabited. He was 74 years old. The man who once ruled with an invisible hand, whose power was absolute but rarely flaunted, died in his own bed, surrounded by family, not in a hail of bullets or behind prison bars. His funeral was a massive affair, attended by hundreds, including many prominent figures from both the underworld and legitimate society, a testament to the quiet influence he wielded even in death. His peaceful demise stands in stark contrast to the dramatic and often brutal ends met by many of his contemporaries, such as Vito Genovese, who died in prison, or Albert Anastasia, gunned down in a barbershop. Carlo Gambino's legacy is one of profound contradiction, a man who achieved unprecedented power through an almost obsessive dedication to discretion. Historians of organized crime generally assess Gambino as the quintessential Teflon Don before John Gotti, a boss who perfected the art of evading justice and consolidating power without drawing undue attention. His reign is often considered the golden age of the Gambino crime family, a period of immense stability and unparalleled financial prosperity. His strategic marriages, alliances, and sophisticated understanding of both criminal enterprise and legitimate business distinguished him from more primitive, purely violent figures. He transformed the crime family from a loose collection of street thugs into a highly structured, almost corporate entity capable of operating on a vast scale. His emphasis on minimal violence and maximum profit became a blueprint for successful criminal organizations, a stark departure from the blood-soaked eras of earlier bosses. He understood that excessive brutality bred public outrage and law enforcement scrutiny. Instead, he favored quiet coercion and systemic corruption. Even in the age of social media and flashy displays, His story remains a cautionary tale of ambition managed with chilling precision. However, his legacy is not without its critics. While he avoided the high-profile violence of some predecessors, his family's pervasive criminal activities, including loan sharking, extortion, and drug trafficking, inflicted immense suffering on countless individuals and communities. His quiet power was, nonetheless, still power rooted in fear and exploitation. Culturally, Carlo Gambino's story has permeated American consciousness, albeit often indirectly. While he himself rarely became the subject of direct biographical films or books in the same way as figures like Al Capone or John Gotti, his influence is palpable in numerous portrayals of the mafia. The archetype of the invisible boss, or the puppet master operating from the shadows, a figure who commands immense power without ever making a public spectacle, owes much to Gambino's real-life example. Films like The Godfather, while fictional, draw heavily on the nuanced power dynamics and family loyalties that Gambino exemplified. Characters who are quiet, calculating, and wield power through intelligence rather than brute force often echo aspects of his personality and methods. His impact on future generations of mobsters was profound. His methods of insulating himself from criminal activity, utilizing layers of subordinates, and focusing on long-term strategy rather than short-term gains, became a model for those aspiring to power within the underworld. Power, discretion, legacy. These words still define his name today, a chilling testament to the man who built an empire in the shadows, proving that true power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. His ability to die a natural death, an almost unheard-of feat for a mafia boss of his stature, remains perhaps his greatest and most unsettling achievement.